So welcome everyone to the Cerini Nonprofit Leadership Series. This is a new series that we've created where every month we will sit down with inspiring nonprofit leaders who are making a significant impact in their communities. I'm Ken Cerini, Managing Partner of Cerini Associates, and today I'm joined by Robert Budd, a mission-driven, results-oriented leader who serves as the Senior Chief Executive Officer and President of Family Residence and Essential Enterprises, also known as FREE. Robert's dedication to empowering individuals with developmental disabilities is truly inspiring. Stay tuned as we dive into this journey, insights, and the incredible work done by FREE. So thank you, Robert, for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thanks for all you do for our community, Ken.
So today, with everything that's going on at the federal level and everything that's going on with respect to cutbacks and executive orders and a lot of other crazy and zaniness that seems to be occurring, let's talk a little bit about maybe advocacy and awareness from a nonprofit perspective. I think in today's space, advocacy and awareness is super, super important. And it still surprises me that a lot of the elected officials out there really don't understand the nonprofit sector. They don't really understand what we do, how we do it. So, how do you change that? What should we be doing as a sector to kind of change that whole attitude?
Yeah, so I think in your statement and question is part of the answer, and that is that it's an incredibly complicated system. And I think genuinely often our elected officials do not understand it. And honestly, we have found that people pretty close to our field are often not aware of just how interdependent and intricate the way that we are regulated, the way that we're funded, actually occurs. And so we have been, and when I say we, not just FREE in our advocacy program and our family advocacy group, but in partnership with the American Network for Community Options and Resources, otherwise known as Anchor, and the New York Disability Associates Group, otherwise known as NIDA, have been really working hard on an education and engagement campaign of our elected officials and other, quite honestly, their constituents, so other interest groups, businesses, and the general public, to better understand how our funding, which is primarily through Medicaid, actually works, how it has been documented for decades through independent studies, often with universities, that it's a wonderful return on investment of public funds because we are supporting people in local communities and they were spending their dollars in local communities. And that really applies to our field across the nation. And we also have been helping people to understand that, just the fact that, Health and Human Services and a pejorative amount of what we do falls under the energy and commerce area of the federal government is often surprising to people. And when we help people understand that the changes that are being proposed right now, when they're looked at in silos and the interdependence of the system and the effectiveness of the system is not understood, there can be very serious unintended consequences. And so we've just been educating people, helping people to understand who it is that is supported, how they are supported, and by whom they are supported. We are finding that people are quite pleasantly receptive to no matter what their political affiliation or wherever their starting point has been. People have really thanked us for being able to help make a very complex circumstance understandable. And so I think that's the first thing that we need to do in a much more perhaps robust but very grassroots manner.
At what level does that happen? Does that happen at the federal level, state level, local level, all of the above? And then
I was
how
just
do
going to
you
say
approach each
choice.
one differently?
Yeah, I was just going to say choice D, all the above. And I think that it really is important to do it at all those levels, and in partnership also with like local chambers, right? Because just people just don't understand often is what we're finding. And so I think that, as your question indicated, this has to be done. It's incredibly time consuming, but I don't know that there's anything more important right now than to help people understand that they have to get the gestalt of the system and then understand the individuals that get supported by this system. And so I do think that is a local government issue, a local community issue, and then certainly a state issue, because much of what occurs at the state, though, is also interconnected very closely to what happens at the federal level. And when people try to compartmentalize, I think is where we really get into some trouble, right? When people don't understand that how important that interdependence actually is to regulatory, legislative, which leads to regulatory and leads to funding decisions.
I think part of the problem is you look at, how significant, you mentioned Medicaid, how significant Medicaid is to New York State, and the number of people within the state that are actually on Medicaid. It's more than a third of the people who live in New York are on Medicaid. So, the impact of any cuts within a Medicaid program or any changes within a Medicaid program are going to have a significant impact on New York State more than any other state.
Very much so. And there are states, New York on average receives, depending on the program, but I think a safe average to say is about a 50% match of federal funds to every $1 spent by New York State itself. In some states across the nation, that's closer to 70%, and even higher percentage of people within the general community being recipients. And these are often people who are the working poor, people who are wonderful, dedicated, participatory community members who literally just can't make ends meet. And often, in many of the programs that Free operates, we see that people need a interim support to get back on their feet or to get on their feet in the first place. And what better use of resources to help people establish independence and a stable ability to live life and be contributing members of the community.
Well, clearly, the tariffs that are out there aren't going to help the situation any. The statistics I've heard are all over the place in terms of how much it's going to cost a family in additional dollars based upon these tariffs. And it's only going to put more of a pressure on the nonprofit sector. What do we do to kind of communicate that? How do we kind of highlight the value of the nonprofit sector given all these factors?
So there have been a number of economic impact studies, and quite honestly, I'm going to sound like this was very purposeful. So I want to be clear. This was in response to chief of staff for a legislator that we were meeting with, and I had referenced the economic impact studies, and it's plural, and they said, well, how often do they occur? And I said, well, honestly, I know there have been at least 3 or 4 that I'm aware of, but I don't remember the years, not my forte to remember time frames, so let me not misspeak. And as it turned out, we've done it basically like once a decade, and by different independent partnerships with different universities and things of that nature. So for decades, these economic impact studies have shown the effectiveness of Medicaid, how not only effective it is as a social support system, but also how efficient it is as a funder. And so I think when you hear things such as we're only going after fraud and abuse, it's really part of our education and engagement campaign to help the elected officials understand that that's also rather well documented. There's a number of oversight bodies who are looking at this at county level, state level, and federal level. And that on average, there's a documented like 5%, I'm pretty sure is the number.
And by the way, half of that's not fraud, or more than half of that's not fraud or abuse. A lot of it's just documentation issues and stuff like that. So,
yes, absolutely.
It's even smaller than that when you actually look at what the real fraud and abuse is.
Yeah, a really important point. So And so we're helping, through questions, just saying, okay, so how are we going to meet these targeted efficiencies um, when the numbers don't add up, right? And that's part of, I think, the awareness raising. We just saw that play out this week, right, with the Senate deciding to take a slightly different stance than the House did, and saying, what, we're going to limit, the growth to 1.5 trillion versus we're going to save X number of dollars over the next 10 years. So I think as people are understanding the system, they're asking questions. They're better able to make decisions based on the valued outcomes, and they're putting people back in the equation. That this is not just a numbers game, and let's not go with the headlines about, you know, they're using. Someone had said, so I want to be clear that this is secondhand. I haven't seen this myself, but less than 1% of the common examples that are being used about, people abusing the system, that's literally less than 1% of how these dollars are being, in this case, misused overall. It's an incredibly monitored and governed well system that has incredible meaning for many people's lives. And you're also keeping many families today, in order to survive, certainly here on Long Island, we know that many people need dual income. And if you don't have that safety net, now you have one family member having to stay home. And, that has a ripple effect. We also know for decades that when the social determinants of health are not honored and people don't get the proactive supports that they need, that it winds up costing the system up to 10 times or more to reactively deal with the crises that then unfold. So that's all part of our education campaign, is to help people understand how the system really works, and why would we put human beings through that unnecessarily when it's a bad fiscal choice, and it's, the morals of that, don't even come to play. Just look on the surface level of what's the intended outcome. Is this good for the individual? Is it good for the community? Is it responsible use of funds? And we can check yes, 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 right? So that's great.
I think one of the things we've talked about this in the past, but I think one of the issues here is that at the federal level, within the president's cabinet, there really is no one who really is focused solely on the nonprofit sector. When the nonprofit sector accounts for such a large portion of the economy, over 14% of the economy, not having someone who's in there who understands and who's advocating for the sector hurts.
Yeah, yeah, and one of the largest growing parts of the care economy, right, for post-industrial nations, right? I mean, I just think we need a different frame of reference. We do need a different mindset as we approach these issues, and we need a forward-thinking one. And by the way, and I know I've said this before, but for the purpose of today's interview, I think it is worth repeating that not only are we a good investment, but we are part of a social solution. So I think part of our battle is, like, by definition, why would we want to be defined as a not-for-profit? Who wants to be defined on what you're not? What we want to be known for is a good community partner, a good investment of resources, so that we are part of a social solution.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the fallacy of all of this also, is that as nonprofit organizations, you guys can just go out and fundraise dollars whenever you need them to make up for cutbacks and shortfalls and everything else, when that is far from reality, and the number of people who are actually contributing to nonprofit organizations is down. Even though dollars may be up, the number of people are down, because people just don't have the resources, and there's a lot of skittishness in today's economy.
Yes, yeah. There's all sorts of ripple effects that, it's that interdependence idea, right? That people just don't understand how interdependent all these issues are.
Yeah. So you talked about Free, which is a fairly large organization. There's a lot of, for every Free, there's, 20 small organizations. What can the little guys do, or little organizations do, to kind of turn up their volume so that they're heard and that they can make a difference within the advocacy marketplace?
Yeah, sure. So, because of Free's partnership model, we are actually we we're structured a little differently than many. So we actually have, as part of our partners organizations that are quite tiny, like 6 staff members, tiny, right? So, and look, I'm a big believer there's pros and cons to everything. And so I think often people say, well, a larger organization has greater resources and they can do more of these advocacy pieces. And I think there's some truth to that. And, certainly that is a pro. But anyone, no matter what your size, has the ability to educate and to tell the story and to make the decisions real, so that people understand that these are not dollar and cents only issues. These are human being issues. And so I think at any size, you have the resources and the ability, especially understanding that clinically, how empowering it is. Our Speakers Bureau loves to tell their stories, right? And whenever possible, you want the people who are the recipients of the supports and to literally show elected officials, this is where your dollars are going. The person who just delivered that message and explained how the system works as a recipient of service, this is what you're supporting. And I think you can do that at any size. I also think no matter what size you are, and I would say this about the largest organizations in our state, which are certainly sizable, that none of us is large enough to have the impact that we need to have, that we collectively, through our coalitions and our associations, need to be speaking with one voice. And I think that was the wisdom informing the New York Disability Advocacy Group, right? And we have, I'm using that particular example because it brought together major associations to come together to speak with one unified voice. And we've really seen the effectiveness of that, understandably, right? Elected officials get, approached for so many issues, so many times, all very important. And they have to be responsible to all of their constituents. And so whenever we can come up with like the 3 major, huge boulder, forget big rocks issues, and keep it simple and straightforward and really laser focus that all the associations are speaking with one voice, I think we've really seen, and not only have we seen the results of that, but we've been told concretely, you've made it much more understandable, right? Versus 7 associations going separately and perhaps seeing it slightly differently. And I think, again, those associations are made up of very, boutique type of organizations, right to the largest in the state. And I think that way you truly can synergize the strengths of those differences to speak with one voice, but also to give example of how it works, no matter whether you're little, medium, or large.
But when we're coming to the table, and you kind of mentioned a bunch of different things here. So when we're coming to the table, do we come to the table, and I know what your answer is going to be, but maybe you can kind of clarify a little bit. So there's the data-driven statistical component of it. There's the personal touch, the people, the individuals we serve, and everything else. There's the story behind all of this. What's the best way to approach this? I mean, most of the time when you're talking to a politician or someone in power that you have a limited amount of time. So, if I'm going there with a message, I'm going there with, something I want to get out, where should I focus my time and my limited, energy? Is it like I said, is it the data? Is it the people? Is it the what?
Yeah, choice D, all the above again, right? So I think you go with the well-designed, and we spent a lot of time and energy, quite honestly, trying to make sure we come up with the best one-pager. Of course, we're kind of verbose, so usually a one-pager means it's front and back. But that being acknowledged, there's usually limited to just a few points. I shouldn't say usually. We make sure it's only limited to a few key points. And then we offer behind that, right? Then you have the little pamphlet that has all the things, like examples of what we're talking about today. You have all those statistics, you have all that information, and that's your handout. but you keep that again and then within that handout, you can, give links to where you're pulling these pieces of information from, so that if someone has, a question or an interest, plus it also just shows the validity of what you're sharing, and that it's not just your personal opinion. So I think the face to face is so important, because there's nothing that replaces good old fashioned human contact, and doing that face to face, hopefully in person, I think is still demonstrably more effective. But certainly we do so much on Zoom nowadays, right? Or some type of venue like that. And I think, going in saying, be concrete about what the facts are, have good questions, so you're getting people to engage and think. Right, you're not there just to make a statement, because you're not going to really have their attention. You want to ask questions so that they are engaging and thinking it through themselves. And I think the power of the personal story, and that's why, having someone receiving services is such or their family member, or someone in their circle of support, is such an effective way of engaging people, because ultimately we're human beings supporting other human beings, right? So I think sometimes we forget that, and people can relate to other human beings. So I think you provide the key points, and then you are clear about what you need. A lot of times we're afraid to make the ask, and so at the end, as you're closing, you say, "So, are you comfortable supporting whatever you're asking for?" Right, and make sure you're clear on what you're asking the elected official to do. And I think you referenced this, and I'll highlight. It's not only the elected officials, it's their chiefs of staff, it's their legislative aides. It's like, never feel like, oh, I didn't get to the, well, often the person doing the research and who's making the recommendation and validating that what you're saying is accurate is the person you're speaking to. And that is the most important person then
Yeah,
for,
they're the
your
ones you want to be in
advocacy.
front of. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you do you find it more effective to, like, if you're doing state legislation, looking to approach the state legislators, do you find it more effective to go up to Albany, get them to come in on your turf, or what, or does it not really matter?
Mm. Yeah, again, you're going to feel like I'm being redundant here, but I want to say choice T again, all the above. So I think you want to go, so if it's state, you want to do local visits in their office, right? So that you show that you are part of their local community. You want to invite and have the tour so that they can see it, feel it, hear it, and experience what actually occurs, and see the magic that gets created, right? You don't, like, to me, that's always my personal favorite, and we get such great feedback when people take the time to do the tours. It's also special events, right? Also a great opportunity for people to, to kind of showcase what's truly occurring and being celebrated. And then I think going to the state office, remember, you're dealing often with overlapping staff, but often different lead staff. So the more your elected officials see you in all of those environments, the more memorable you are. And for us, certainly for agencies supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities, with behavioral health needs through the Office of Mental Health, OASIS, whatever, DOH, whatever part of the service delivery model you're advocating for, or again, choice D, all the above, right? It's so important to understand how difficult it is for someone who's just getting a 15, 30 minute at most soundbite, basically, of a very complex system. So you want to do it multiple times, have multiple opportunities for them to experience and be engaged.
It's like anything else with marketing. It's touch point, touch point, touch point, touch point, and eventually it clicks in.
Yeah. And we see that happen often, where people's like, I don't think, so-and-so was, even paying attention. I was like, you know what? We don't know what kind of day they're having. They didn't cancel. We got some time. Who knows what they'll look at later? And we've had that happen where, someone will then reach out through an email or a call and say, hey, I'm looking at this and I just want the backup for it, right? So they've heard you.
How can nonprofits ensure that the communities they serve have a voice in shaping services and policies?
You know, it's a great question. Most bodies, whether they're governmental, local planning, statewide, federal, uh, all have different groups, committees, task groups, work groups. I know, it's that's one of the reasons I believe in the power of associations and coalitions, um, because if we try to individually do that, it can be staggering. But when we combine our resources and we all offer kind of our best examples, and you're demonstrating the synergy that operates within the field and why it's so important to support the entire field. Yes, it's important to give specific example from your organization, but to tie it to the greater good for the community and to put it in context for people, I think is also really important.
So, if there was one thing you'd like to get out there to every policymaker and funder to understand about the nonprofit sector, what would it be?
Mm. Oh, not good for my style. One thing, huh?
All right, I'll give you two.
uh, um, I think it's to understand the interdependence of our system, that we are good community partners, and that whenever government, business, and the not-for-profits come together, I call that the magic moment, right? Whenever you're part of seeing those three uh,
Yeah, but the problem is
groups.
it happens about as often as the planets align.
Well, but I think we're getting better at creating those moments, right? So I guess that would be the two-part message. A, when that happens, there's magic that gets created, and it's the best use of all of our time and resources collectively. And B, to make that happen more. But I think that does come. I guess that was my original thought. Is the most important thing we can do is help people to get past the headlines and to truly understand who is being served, how they're being served, and why that is such a wise investment of their time and energy and resources.
Yeah, unfortunately, and I hear you, and unfortunately, that message doesn't get across as often as you'd like it to. And unfortunately, it seems like the business community has kind of a louder, was it stegaphone to get the message out there than the nonprofit sector. And that's unfortunate because the nonprofit sector is doing much more important work in my mind. I'll put it that way than the for-profit businesses are.
Well, and that really speaks, I alluded to this, probably a topic for a whole different session, right? But this, the whole construct of the not-for-profit. I think that's such a wise point to understand that businesses, if a business wants to innovate, they have resources to put towards that innovation, right?
So
To
let's call
continually.
it if a for-profit business versus a nonprofit business,
Yeah.
because we're
Yeah.
both businesses. It's
Yes.
just a matter of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. Yes. Really important point. Thank you. Yes. Um, and so for the for-profits, that's an assumption. And for the big for-profits, that there's literally budget lines, large budget lines for that. When not-for-profits sometimes get challenged, and I've actually had elected officials say, "Well, who's paying for you to be here to advocate?" And it's like, well, luckily we have like philanthropists who really understand who we support and how we do it, and really think this is a great investment. But just the fact that you get asked that question, right? It's like you're supposed to accept a handout versus no, we are part of a social construct that is really beneficial to the larger community, including the business community. We are employers in some counties throughout New York State. Agencies like ours are the largest employer in that county. So then we're an economic driver, not an economic taker. Um, and so I think that's a really, really important point to highlight. So yeah, thanks for saying that.
So, Robert, that's basically all the time we have today. So First of all, I totally appreciate all of your insight and everything. And thank you for everybody for tuning into the Cerini Nonprofit Leadership Series. We hope you found today's conversation with Robert Budd both insightful and inspiring. Be sure to join us next month for another interview with a nonprofit leader who is making a difference. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and share it with others. For more information about Cerini Associates and our work with nonprofits, visit CeriniAssociates.com. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and making an impact in your community. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Ken, for all you do.